The snow was falling the day they sent him away. Not as a king, not as a hero, not even as a Stark. They sent him away like a mistake. Jon Snow did not look back at King's Landing when the gates closed behind him. The Unsullied watched him as if he was still dangerous. Maybe he was. Maybe they were right to fear him. He had killed a queen. He had killed the woman he loved. And still, it was not enough to satisfy anyone. The North had a queen now. Sansa ruled from Winterfell. Arya sailed west into the unknown. Bran sat on the Iron Throne with empty eyes and quiet words. Tyrion spoke of peace, of rebuilding, of a better world. But no one spoke of him. They said sending him to the Wall was mercy, a compromise, a way to stop another war. But Jon understood the truth. He had become inconvenient, a living reminder of blood, dragons, and broken promises, a Targaryen who did not want the throne, a Stark who could not belong. As he rode north with the Night's Watch, he felt something inside him changing. For years, he had chosen honor, chosen mercy, chosen forgiveness, and every time it had cost him, he forgave the men who mocked him at Castle Black. They stabbed him. He forgave the wildlings who once fought him. They followed him, but he carried their dead. He bent the knee to Daenerys to save the North. She burned a city. He killed her to save the realm. The realm exiled him. The wind grew colder the farther north they rode. The Wall stood ahead, tall and silent, like a grave for old dreams. Ghost ran beside him, white fur bright against the snow. The direwolf looked at him often, as if sensing the storm inside his master. That night, inside his old chambers at Castle Black, Jon did not sleep. Tormund had returned beyond the Wall. Most of the Night's Watch were boys with no enemies left to fight. The White Walkers were gone. The Great War was over. And yet Jon felt no peace. He stared at the fire until the flames blurred. He thought of Daenerys lying in his arms, her blood warm on his hands. He thought of the way Drogon screamed before flying away. He thought of the council deciding his fate without even asking what he wanted. They used me, he thought. Used my name. Used my sword. Used my love. Then they threw me away. For the first time in his life, Jon allowed himself to feel anger without pushing it down. It came slowly at first, like heat under ice. Then it burned. Bran knew. The thought came suddenly. Bran, who saw everything. Bran, who spoke of fate and stories. Bran, who became king after all the blood was spilled. If he could see the past, could he not see Daenerys burning the city? Could he not see the choice Jon would have to make? Was this always the plan? Jon stood up so fast the chair fell behind him. Had he been guided like a pawn, moved across a board he could not see? Every step, every choice, leading to this ending where Bran wore a crown and Jon wore chains of duty once more. A bitter laugh escaped him. Honor, duty, love. They were chains, and he had carried them willingly. Outside, the wind howled against the wall. Jon stepped out into the snow. The cold bit into his skin, but it felt good. It kept his thoughts sharp. He walked to the edge of the wall and looked south. Somewhere beyond those lands sat the man who called himself king. Somewhere in Winterfell, his sister ruled the north. They all moved forward, building their futures, while he was buried in the past. Ghost came to his side. Jon rested a hand on the direwolf's head. I gave them everything, he whispered, and they gave me exile. The words hung in the frozen air. What if I stopped forgiving? The idea was dangerous. It felt wrong, but it also felt powerful. For so long he had tried to be better than his enemies. What had it brought him? Pain, loss, betrayal. Maybe the world did not reward good men. Maybe it only feared strong ones. He thought of his true name, Aegon Targaryen, the blood of the dragon. A claim stronger than Bran's broken body sitting on a throne. The Unsullied were gone now, sailing to Nenath. The Dothraki had scattered. The great armies were tired. The realm was weak, pretending to be whole. If he walked south with the free folk at his back, who would stop him? The North loved him. The wildlings would follow him into fire. Even some southern lords had once whispered his name. He had never wanted the throne. But now, it was not about wanting. It was about taking back what was stolen. Jon closed his eyes and imagined King's Landing. Not burning, not destroyed. Conquered, not for madness, not for cruelty. For justice. For every betrayal. For every knife in the dark. His eyes opened slowly. The softness that once lived there was fading. In its place was something colder than the wall itself. If they wanted a monster, he murmured, maybe I should become one. The decision was not made in that moment. Not fully, but a seed had been planted. And in the frozen north, even the smallest seed could break stone when it chose to grow. Behind him, the horn of the Night's Watch sounded once, echoing through the night. Jon Snow did not turn around. For the first time, he was not thinking about defending the realm. He was thinking about taking it, and far to the south, in a city still smelling of ash, a king with strange, distant eyes suddenly paused, as if he felt something shift in the cold. Something dangerous, something coming back to claim what it believed was its own. The next morning, Jon Snow woke before the sun. But this time, he did not wake with duty in his heart. He woke with purpose. The cold air inside his chamber felt sharper than usual. He dressed slowly, carefully, as if preparing for battle. Black leather, heavy cloak, long claw at his side. The sword felt different in his hand now. Lighter, more certain. Outside, Castle Black was quiet. The few remaining brothers of the Night's Watch moved like shadows. There were no great threats left, no White Walkers, no wildling raids. The wall stood as a monument to a war already finished, and that was the problem. There was no reason for him to be here. He walked beyond the gate, where the free folk had begun settling again. Tormund spotted him first. The big wildling grinned, walking through the snow like it was nothing. I was wondering when the crow would stop sulking, Tormund said with a laugh. You look different. Jon didn't smile back. I need to speak with you, he said quietly. Tormund studied him more closely now. The humor faded. This sounds serious. They walked away from the others, toward the frozen forest. For a long moment, Jon said nothing. He watched the trees, the endless white horizon. This land had always been honest, brutal, but honest. No lies, no thrones, no councils whispering behind closed doors. Do you remember when you asked me to stay? Jon said. Tormund shrugged. You belong here. Always did. Jon nodded slowly. What if I told you I don't? That caught Tormund's attention. I was sent here to disappear, Jon continued. To keep the peace, to make others comfortable. That sounds like kneeling talk, Tormund muttered. Jon's jaw tightened. I bent the knee once to save my people. I killed the woman I loved to save the realm. And they rewarded me with exile. The wind picked up, carrying his words across the snow. I'm tired of being used, Jon said. Tormund crossed his arms. So what are you saying? Jon finally turned to face him fully. What if we didn't stay in the north? The silence between them grew heavy. You want to march south? Tormund asked slowly. I want to take back what's mine. Those words felt strange, heavy, but right. Tormund let out a low whistle. The Iron Chair, you never wanted it. I never wanted it. Jon agreed. But it was mine by blood. And they knew it. They all knew it. He thought of Tyrion's careful words, of Bran's quiet stare, of Sansa saying nothing when they decided his fate. They chose him because he was easier, Jon said bitterly, because I would not play their game. And now? Tormund asked. Now I'm done being the good man. Tormund stared at him for a long time. Then, slowly, a grin spread across his face. I always said you'd make a terrifying king. Jon almost smiled at that. The free folk follow strength, Tormund said. They don't care about southern crowns, but they care about you. You fought for them, bled for them. Would they follow me south? Jon asked. Tormund's eyes gleamed. If you promised them land, freedom, a chance to take from the rich lords who looked down on them? Jon didn't hesitate. Yes. Tormund laughed loudly. Then the South should start praying. That evening, the wildlings gathered around massive fires. Word spread quickly. Jon stood before them, ghost at his side, flames reflected in his dark eyes. For years, they had known him as the man who tried to make peace, the man who talked before he fought. Tonight, they saw something else. "They sent me here to bury me," Jon said, his voice carrying over the wind. "They think I'll guard a wall that no longer matters." Murmurs spread through the crowd. "I fought for the living. I gave everything. And when it was done, they decided my fate without me." Anger stirred among the wildlings. They understood that. They had been pushed aside by southern lords for generations. "The South is weak," Jon continued. "Their armies are broken. Their gold is gone. They sit in burned cities pretending everything is fine." He paused. "I am Aegon Targaryen." Gasps. Whispers. The true heir to the Iron Throne. He let that sink in. They chose another, not because he was stronger, not because he was wiser, but because he was easier to control. His voice hardened. "I don't want to control you. I don't want to chain you. I offer you something different." He looked at all of them. Land, freedom, revenge. The last word burned in the air. "For every time they called you savages, for every time they pushed you into the cold," the wildlings began shouting. Weapons lifted into the sky. Tormund stepped forward, raising his axe. "The White Wolf rides south." The chant grew louder, louder, like thunder rolling across the frozen world. Jon felt it in his chest. This was no longer a thought. It was happening. Later that night, alone again, Jon stood before the wall one last time. He knew there would be no turning back. He thought of Sansa, of Arya, of Bran. If they stood in his way, what would he do? His face hardened. He would do what needed to be done. Honor had brought him nothing but pain. Now he would choose power. And far in King's Landing, Bran Stark sat quietly in the Red Keep, his pale eyes unfocused. Somewhere in the darkness of his mind, ravens stirred violently. He saw snow moving south. He saw a wolf crowned in fire. And for the first time since becoming king, Bran looked afraid. The march south began before the first true thaw of winter. Thousands of free folk moved like a dark wave across the snow, their banners nothing more than animal skins and rough cloth, but their spirits were strong. They were not marching for a king. They were marching for vengeance. Jon rode at the front with Tormund at his side. Ghost ran ahead, silent and deadly. The wind carried the smell of pine and distant smoke as they crossed the Gift. The abandoned villages near the wall stood empty, but farther south, people still lived. Farmers, small lords, survivors of wars they never asked for. Jon knew this was the point of no return. When they crossed into northern lands ruled by Queen Sansa, word would spread fast. Winterfell would know, and Sansa would understand exactly what he was doing. By the time they reached the outskirts of the first holdfast, the banners of House Tallheart were raised in alarm. Riders had already been sent toward Winterfell. Jon didn't order an attack immediately. He waited. The gates of Torrhen Square opened cautiously. A small group of northern soldiers rode out. They looked confused more than afraid. One of them recognized him. "Lord Snow?" the young man said, shocked. "We heard you took the block again." Jon dismounted slowly. "I did," he said calmly. The soldier looked past him at the thousands of free folk warriors gathering behind him. Axes, spears, scarred faces hungry for something more than survival. "What is this?" the soldier asked. "A choice," Jon replied. The Lord of the Holdfast, a thin man with nervous eyes, stepped forward. "The Queen in the North will not welcome this." Jon's jaw tightened slightly at that title. "I'm not here to harm the North," he said. "Not if the North does not stand against me." "And if we do?" the Lord asked carefully. Jon stepped closer, his voice quiet but firm. "Then I will remind you who won the Battle of the Bastards." The words hit hard. The soldiers shifted uneasily. Jon continued, "I bled for the North. I died for it. I fought the dead while the South hid behind walls, and when the war was over, they exiled me like a criminal." His voice rose slightly. "I am not marching against my people. I am marching against those who think they can decide the fate of others without consequence. The Lord swallowed. You speak of the Iron Throne. I speak of justice. Behind him, Tormund's men began banging weapons against shields. The sound echoed like distant thunder. The northern soldiers were outnumbered 10-1. Jon could see the fear growing. He did not enjoy this, but he did not step back either. Kneel, the Lord whispered. The young soldier beside him hesitated. But the queen is not here, the Lord snapped. Slowly, the Lord of Torrhen Square dropped to one knee. One by one, the soldiers followed. Jon felt something strange in his chest. Power. Not taken through love, not given freely, taken through fear. And it worked. That night, Torrhen Square fed the free folk. Supplies were gathered. More northern houses, hearing what had happened, began sending ravens. Some swore loyalty. Others called for Sansa. Winterfell would not stay silent. 3 days later, Jon stood in the godswood of Winterfell. The gates had opened without a fight, but the air was colder than the snow beneath his boots. Sansa Stark stood before him, crowned in silver, her expression unreadable. She dismissed her guards, leaving only the two of them beneath the heart tree. You should have sent word, she said calmly. You would have told me to stop, Jon replied. Yes, she said without hesitation. They stared at each other for a long moment. Brother and sister, once united against Ramsay Bolton, now standing on opposite sides of something far bigger. You're marching south, Sansa said quietly. Yes. You'll start another war. Jon's eyes hardened. There was never peace. Sansa stepped closer. The North is finally free. Do you understand what you're risking? I understand what they took from me, he answered. Her voice sharpened. You gave up your claim. I never gave it up, Jon said firmly. It was taken. Sansa studied his face. You've changed. Yes, he agreed. She looked toward the courtyard, where thousands of wildlings filled Winterfell's walls. They will never accept you in the south, she warned. You'll be seen as a conqueror, a threat. Good, Jon said. The word shocked even her. For years, Jon had tried to prove he wasn't a threat, that he was honorable, different. Now he wasn't hiding it. I won't kneel to Bran, he continued, not after what he allowed. Sansa's eyes flickered slightly. You think Bran planned this? I think Bran saw it. Silence. The wind moved through the red leaves of the heart tree. If you march south with the north behind you, Sansa said slowly, there will be blood between us. Jon stepped closer. I don't want the north, he said. I want the throne. And if the north refuses to follow you? Jon's voice dropped, colder than she had ever heard it. Then I will leave you behind. The meaning was clear. He would not attack her, but he would not stop for her either. Sansa searched his face for the brother she once knew. She found only a shadow of him. You're playing a dangerous game, she whispered. Jon nodded. For once, he said, I'm the one moving the pieces. Outside the godswood, horns suddenly sounded from the eastern wall. A scout rode into the courtyard shouting, Riders from the Riverlands, banners of the crown! Jon and Sansa exchanged a look. Bran had not waited. The first army had arrived, and this time Jon did not intend to show mercy. The banners of the crown snapped in the freezing wind. Golden lions of Casterly Rock, black stags of the Stormlands, and the three-eyed raven of the king. They had come faster than Jon expected. From the walls of Winterfell, he watched the southern army spread across the fields like dark ants over white snow. Nearly 8,000 men, armored, organized, led by seasoned commanders who had survived too many wars to underestimate a Stark or a Targaryen. Sansa stood beside him, silent. He's testing you, she said quietly. This isn't his full strength. Jon nodded. He wants to see if I'll hesitate. Will you? Jon's jaw tightened. No. The gates of Winterfell opened, and Jon rode out to meet the crown's commanders between the two forces. Tormund rode at his side, restless, eager. From the opposing line, a familiar figure approached. Sir Davos Seaworth. The sight of him struck something deep inside Jon's chest. Loyalty, memory, trust. Davos removed his glove as he rode forward. I was hoping the rumors were wrong. Jon said nothing at first. You always were stubborn, Davos continued softly. But this, marching south with wildlings, for a throne you never wanted? I never wanted it, Jon said evenly. But I won't let them pretend it was never mine. Davos sighed. Bran doesn't want war. Then he shouldn't have sent an army. The older man hesitated. He sent us to stop bloodshed before it spreads. Jon glanced at the thousands of soldiers behind Davos. With swords, Davos lowered his voice. If you stand down, there can still be peace. The North remains independent. You return beyond the wall. No one has to die. Jon looked past him at the banners. No one? He asked quietly. What about me? What about what they did? Davos's face softened. You did what you thought was right. And I paid for it alone. The wind howled between them. You taught me something once, Davos said carefully, about doing what's right even when it's hard. Jon's eyes darkened. I'm done doing what's right for people who don't do right by me. The words hit like a blade. Davos saw it then, the change. You'll lose yourself, he warned. Maybe I already did. Jon turned his horse back toward Winterfell. Davos called out, If you cross this field with steel drawn, there's no coming back from it. Jon didn't look back. There was no coming back the day they chose him. The horns sounded, and the world broke open. The crown's archers fired first. A dark cloud of arrows sliced through the pale sky. Shields, Tormund roared. Wildlings raised rough shields and scattered with wild unpredictability. Many fell, pierced before they could reach the lines. Blood stained the snow red. Jon felt it twist inside him. This was his doing. He drew Longclaw. Forward, he shouted. The free folk charged like a storm unleashed. No perfect formations. No polished discipline. Just raw fury crashing against armored ranks. The first collision thundered across the field. Steel screamed against steel. Jon rode straight into the heart of it. He cut down the first soldier without hesitation, a clean strike. Then another, and another. Each movement precise, controlled. But there was no mercy in his eyes. A knight charged him with a warhammer. Jon twisted in the saddle, parried, and drove Longclaw through the man's throat. Warm blood sprayed across the snow. Around him, chaos reigned. Wildlings dragged knights from horses. Southern infantry tried to hold formation, but the savage assault broke their lines. Tormund was laughing as he fought, his axe splitting shields. Jon dismounted when his horse was struck, landing hard in the snow. A soldier lunged at him. Jon caught the blade on Longclaw and headbutted the man before slashing across his chest. He felt no hesitation, no guilt, only clarity. Across the battlefield, he saw Davos trying to pull men back, shouting for order. Then a horn sounded from the crown's rear. Reinforcements, heavy cavalry. Jon's eyes narrowed. Bran hadn't just sent a warning, he had sent a message. The cavalry charged into the Free Folk's flank, cutting through them brutally. Wildlings fell in dozens. Screams filled the air. For a split second, Jon felt doubt. This was the cost. But then, he remembered King's Landing burning. He remembered chains of exile. He roared and pushed forward. He reached the cavalry's path and struck at the horse's legs, bringing riders crashing down. Tormund rallied the wildlings, redirecting their assault. The battle lasted hours. When the snow finally settled, the crown's army began retreating. Not destroyed, but broken enough. The field was a sea of red. Thousands lay dead or dying. Jon stood in the middle of it, breathing heavily, blood soaking his armor. He watched as the last of the crown's banners disappeared beyond the hills. Victory. But it didn't feel like the Battle of the Bastards. There were no cheers of freedom, only exhausted silence. Tormund approached, bloodied but grinning. They ran. Jon nodded slowly. We'll lose more before this is done, Tormund said. I know. Behind them, northern soldiers who had secretly joined Jon's cause knelt among the wounded. Winterfell's gates opened to receive the injured. From the walls, Sansa watched the carnage below. When Jon returned inside, She met him in the courtyard. "There are boys among the dead," she said quietly. "Boys who survived the long night." Jon's voice was steady. "So did I." She searched his face for regret. There was none. "The Riverlands will rally next," she warned. "And the Reach, this will grow." "Let it," Jon replied. That night, ravens flew south. Not messages of rebellion, messages of conquest. And in King's Landing, Bran Stark sat motionless in the throne room. His pale eyes rolled back. He saw the battlefield, the blood, the wolf, standing over the fallen. He whispered softly to the empty hall, "He's chosen fire." Beside him, Tyrion Lannister clenched his fists. "We must end this quickly," Tyrion said. Bran's distant voice echoed, "Yes." Outside the Red Keep, the city still smelled faintly of ash, and far to the north, Jon Snow washed blood from Longclaw. But no matter how much snow he used, the red did not seem to fade. The war did not seem to purl across the Seven Kingdoms. It exploded. Within days of the battle outside Winterfell, ravens flew in every direction. Some carried pleas for protection. Others carried oaths of loyalty. A few carried quiet promises of betrayal. Jon did not wait. He moved. The northern houses were divided. Some stood firmly with Queen Sansa, afraid of losing the fragile peace they had bled for. Others remembered who had led them against Ramsay Bolton, who had faced the Night King, who had died and risen again. More and more banners began to gather beneath the direwolf. Jon didn't force them. He simply reminded them. "I never abandoned the North," he told the lords who came to kneel. "The realm abandoned me. It was enough." By the time the army marched past Moat Cailin, it had doubled. Free folk. Northern soldiers. Hardened survivors of too many winters. They were not marching for politics. They were marching because they believed something had been taken from them, and Jon was no longer pretending otherwise. Word came quickly from the Riverlands. House Tully had declared for the crown. Edmure Tully, always eager to prove himself useful, had called his banners and fortified Riverrun. Tormund laughed when he heard it. A castle in the middle of water sounds like a challenge. Jon stared at the map in silence. "If Riverrun falls," he said, "the Riverlands fall with it. And if it doesn't," one of the northern lords asked. Jon's eyes were cold. "It will." When they reached the outskirts of the Riverlands, they found villages already burning, not by Jon's men, by crown forces retreating and stripping resources to deny them supplies. Fields torched, livestock slaughtered, families fleeing. Jon dismounted near one such village, staring at the smoke rising into the gray sky. A woman clutched her child as she watched his army pass. "Are you here to save us?" she asked weakly. The question struck deeper than any blade. Once, he would have answered without hesitation. Now, he only said, "I'm here to end it." But even as he spoke, he knew ending it would mean more fire before peace. They reached Riverrun at dawn 3 days later. The castle rose from the water like a stubborn memory. Strong walls, raised drawbridge, archers ready. Edmure Tully stood atop the battlements, red hair bright even from a distance. Jon Snow. His voice echoed across the water. Or should I say Aegon Targaryen? Murmurs rippled through Jon's ranks. Jon rode forward alone. "I didn't come to trade titles," Jon called back. "Open your gates." Edmure laughed nervously. "You've lost your mind. The king sits in King's Landing. The North has its queen. This madness ends here." "It ends when Bran steps down," Jon replied. "That will never happen." Jon studied the walls carefully. "You're choosing the wrong side," he said calmly. "I'm choosing peace." "No," Jon said, his voice carrying like steel. "You're choosing safety." Edmure's face tightened. "And what are you choosing?" the River Lord demanded. Jon paused. "Justice." He turned his horse and rode back to his army. Tormund grinned. "No surrender? No." The siege began. For 2 days they tested Riverrun's defenses. Arrows darkened the sky. Siege engines pounded at the gates. The river protected the castle well, but it also trapped those inside. On the third night, Jon stood alone, staring at the water. He could starve them out, It would take weeks. Weeks meant time for the crown to gather larger forces, time for the Reach and Stormlands to reinforce. Or he could end it now. He remembered King's Landing in flames. He remembered swearing he would never become that. But Riverrun was no city of innocence. It was a military stronghold defying him. Tormund approached quietly. "We have boats." Jon didn't look at him. "How many will die?" Jon asked. Tormund shrugged. "Less than if this war drags on." That was the truth, and Jon had stopped running from truth. Before dawn, small groups of free folk crossed the river silently in boats. They scaled the less guarded western wall under cover of darkness. By sunrise, Riverrun's gates were open from within. The battle inside was brutal and short. Jon found Edmure in the great hall, sword trembling in his hand. "You don't have to do this," Edmure said desperately. "We're family." Jon walked forward slowly. "Family?" he repeated quietly. "Where was family when I was sentenced without trial?" Edmure swallowed. It was the only way to prevent war. "And this?" Jon gestured to the sounds of fighting outside. "What do you call this?" Edmure had no answer. He dropped his sword. For a moment, the hall was silent. Jon could spare him. Make him bend the knee. Show mercy. The old Jon would have. But mercy had built this rebellion against him in the first place. He stepped forward. "On your knees." Edmure obeyed. In the courtyard of Riverrun, before both armies, Jon Snow executed Lord Edmure Tully. One clean stroke. Gasps echoed across the stone walls. It was not rage. It was not madness. It was a message. Bend the knee or fall. As Riverrun's banners were torn down and replaced, ravens flew once more. This time carrying a single sentence, "Riverrun has fallen. Lord Tully is dead." In King's Landing, Tyrion read the message twice before lowering it slowly. "He's not hesitating," Tyrion whispered. Bran sat unnaturally still on the throne. "No," Bran said softly, "he isn't." Tyrion looked toward the doors of the throne room. "We must gather every house still loyal." Bran's distant gaze shifted slightly. "He grows stronger with each victory." "And crueler," Tyrion added. Far away, in the courtyard of Riverrun, Jon stood before his army. No cheers followed the execution. Only fear and loyalty born from it. He felt the weight of what he had done. But he did not regret it. If the realm would only understand strength, then strength was what he would give them. And now, the path to King's Landing lay open. Smoke drifted over Blackwater Bay long before the army reached the capital. At first, Jon thought it was memory playing tricks on him. The last time he had stood near King's Landing, the sky had been black with ash. The screams had not stopped for hours. Now, weeks later, the city still carried scars. Burned districts remained half rebuilt. Refugees crowded the outer roads. And above the Red Keep, the banner of the three-eyed raven flew calmly, as if nothing had ever been broken. Jon stood on a hill overlooking the distant walls. King's Landing, the city where he killed the woman he loved, the city that judged him, the city that cast him aside. Behind him stood nearly 20,000 fighters now, free folk, northern banners, river lords who bent the knee after Riverrun fell. Even some knights from the Vale had quietly joined him, claiming they followed strength. Fear was spreading faster than his army. Tormund walked up beside him, chewing on dried meat. "Ugly place," he muttered. "Too many walls." Jon didn't answer immediately. "They'll have more men inside than we've seen yet," he finally said. "The Reach, the Stormlands, the Crownlands, and dragons," Tormund asked bluntly. That word hung heavy. Drogon had vanished after Daenerys' death. Some said he flew east. Others said he nested in the ruins of old Valyria. Jon had not seen him since that day in the throne room, but sometimes, in the quiet hours before sleep, he dreamed of wings in the sky. "We fight what stands before us," Jon said firmly. Below them, scouts returned at full speed. "Your Grace," one of the northern captains said, still catching his breath. Jon didn't correct the title anymore. There's movement inside the city, the gates are closed, siege engines on the walls, and he hesitated. And what? A shadow passed over the bay at dawn, large, with wings, silence fell, Tormund's grin slowly faded. Jon felt his pulse steady instead of quicken. So, he said quietly, he came back. The capital did not wait for siege. At sunset, the gates of King's Landing opened. Not in surrender, in challenge. The crown's full host marched out in disciplined formation, lining the plains outside the city. Armor polished, shields locked, a wall of steel. At their center stood Tyrion Lannister and Sir Brienne of Tarth, leading in Bran's name. Jon rode forward alone again. He noticed Tyrion's face looked older, more tired. "You've become efficient," Tyrion said when they met between armies. "You've become predictable," Jon replied calmly. Tyrion sighed. Edmure didn't deserve that. None of this was necessary. "It was," Jon said, "the moment you decided my fate without asking me." Tyrion's voice sharpened. "We prevented another civil war." Jon gestured to the thousands behind him. "And what do you call this?" Brienne stepped forward. "Stand down, Jon, please." For a brief second, he saw the old world in her eyes. Oaths, honor, belief in something better. But that world had not protected him. "Where is Bran?" Jon asked. "He will not risk himself," Tyrion said carefully. Jon let out a cold breath. "Of course not." The ground trembled. At first it was faint, then louder. A shadow swept across the battlefield. Gasps erupted from both armies. Wings, massive, dark, terrifying. Drogon descended from the clouds like a living nightmare. His scales were darker than before. His roar shook the air itself. He landed behind the crown's forces, flames flickering between his teeth. Jon's army shifted uneasily. Even Tormund stared in stunned silence. Tyrion looked back at the dragon with something between fear and hope. "He chose to return," Tyrion said quietly. "Perhaps he remembers who truly commands fire." But Jon did not look afraid. He stared at Drogon. The dragon's massive eyes locked onto him. For a heartbeat, the battlefield disappeared. Jon remembered the throne room, the blades sliding into Daenerys' heart. Drogon melting the Iron Throne, not burning him. The dragon had spared him. Now Drogon stepped forward slowly, ignoring the crown's soldiers scrambling away from him. Tyrion's voice cracked. "Hold your lines." But Drogon did not look at Tyrion. He looked at Jon. The air between them felt charged. Jon slowly removed his gloves and dropped Longclaw into the dirt. Gasps rose from his army. He walked forward alone. Every step felt like walking toward judgment. Drogon lowered his massive head, smoke curling from his nostrils. Jon stood close enough to feel the heat radiating from his scales. For a long moment, nothing moved. Then slowly, Drogon bowed his head. A wave of shock rippled across both armies. Tyrion staggered back. Brienne whispered, "Seven, save us." Jon reached out carefully and placed his hand against the dragon's scales. He did not smile. He did not silence. He simply climbed. When he mounted Drogon's back, the world shifted. The dragon roared, spreading his wings wide. Fire burst into the sky, not at the armies, but upward, like a declaration. Jon looked down at Tyrion, at the crown's forces, at the city walls behind them. His voice carried over the battlefield, stronger than ever. "I gave you a chance to end this." Drogon inhaled deeply. "Now I take the throne." Panic broke the crown's formation. Archers raised bows. Loose, someone screamed. Arrows flew. Drogon launched into the air. The war had just changed. And this time, Jon Snow was not fighting against dragonfire. He was commanding it. Flames erupted across the crown's siege lines, scattering soldiers in terror. The sky itself seemed to burn. Below, the city of King's Landing trembled once more. But this time, the dragon did not burn the streets. He burned the army standing in Jon's way. And high above the chaos, Jon's face was no longer filled with doubt. It was filled with resolve. The White Wolf had found his fire. Fire fell from the sky, but not blindly, not wildly, not like before. Jon guided Drogon with sharp turns and calculated drags. The dragon's flames struck siege engines first, supply wagons, cavalry formations. He avoided the city walls, avoided the crowded streets beyond them. This was not madness. This was strategy. Below, the Crown's army shattered. Men threw down shields and ran. Horses screamed as fire split the ground around them. Entire formations dissolved into panic. The disciplined lines that had once looked so strong now scattered like frightened ants. Tyrion barely escaped the first wave of flame, dragged to safety by Brienne as Drogon's shadow passed overhead. "Retreat!" Tyrion shouted hoarsely. "Fall back to the gates!" But it was too late. Jon descended again, Drogon's roar echoing against the city walls. The ground shook as the dragon landed directly between the fleeing army and the gates of King's Landing. No escape. Jon dismounted slowly. His boots touched the earth, still smoking from dragon fire. The Crown's remaining commanders knelt without being told. Even Brienne dropped her sword. Tyrion stood frozen, staring at Jon as if seeing him for the first time. "You've won," Tyrion said quietly. Jon's expression was unreadable. "Yes," he replied. The gates of King's Landing creaked open from within. White banners appeared along the walls. The city was surrendering. Jon mounted Drogon again, not to burn, but to enter. The people of King's Landing filled the streets as he flew overhead. Some screamed in terror. Others fell to their knees. Children hid behind their mothers. They remembered dragon fire. Jon saw the fear in their faces, and for a brief moment, something old stirred inside him. He could burn it all, end it completely. No more politics, no more betrayal, just ash and silence. Drogon felt the shift in him. The dragon's neck tensed slightly. Jon closed his eyes. "No," he whispered. He would not become her. Drogon landed in the courtyard of the Red Keep. Jon dismounted and walked alone toward the throne room. The doors stood open. Inside, Bran Stark waited on the throne, silent, still, watching. The hall was nearly empty now, only a handful of guards. Tyrion entered moments later, breathless, but said nothing. Jon stopped halfway down the long hall. For years the Iron Throne had stood there. Now it was gone. Melted. In its place sat a simpler seat, crafted from dark wood and steel. Bran's pale eyes met Jon's. "You've spilled much blood," Bran said calmly. "So did you," Jon replied. Bran tilted his head slightly. "I did not hold the sword. You held the power." Silence filled the throne room. "You saw it all," Jon continued. "You saw Daenerys burn the city. You saw what I would have to do. And still, you let it happen." "I saw many paths," Bran said. "This one led to the least destruction." Jon let out a harsh breath. "Tell that to the men burning outside." Bran's face did not change. "If you had not killed her, the world would have burned. And if I had not marched south, you would have lived in exile," Bran said quietly, "and resentment would have grown until another war began anyway." Jon stepped closer. "So this was always the plan? You on the throne, me cleaning your mess?" "No," Bran replied softly. "You chose every step." Jon's hand twitched at his side. "I was sent away. You accepted it." The words hit harder than any accusation. For a moment, Jon saw it clearly. He had accepted exile. He had accepted silence. He had accepted being used. Until he didn't. "You could have spoken," Jon said. "You could have defended me." "And fracture the realm further?" Bran asked. "The Unsullied would have slaughtered thousands." Jon's voice dropped to a dangerous calm. "So you sacrificed me." Bran did not deny it. "Yes." The single word echoed like a hammer. Tyrion inhaled sharply. Bran continued. "A king must think of the whole." "And what am I?" Jon demanded. "A necessary cost." The old Jon might have lowered his head, might have understood. This Jon did not. He walked the remaining distance between them. The guards tensed, but did not move. Drogon's roar outside shook the walls. "You speak of cost," Jon said quietly. but you never paid one. Bran's eyes flickered slightly. I lost my legs. You gained a crown. The air felt heavy. You can still end this peacefully, Bran said. Take the north. Rule beside Sansa. Let the south rebuild. Jon stared at the throne. He had not wanted it once. Now it felt like something owed. You chose yourself, Jon said, and called it destiny. Bran's gaze hardened slightly for the first time, and you chose revenge. Yes, Jon said without shame. For a long moment, neither moved. Then Jon drew Longclaw. The sound of steel sliding free echoed through the hall. Tyrion stepped forward desperately. Jon, don't. But Jon's eyes never left Bran. You told me once, Jon said quietly, that I was where I needed to be. He lifted the sword. Now I choose where I stand. The blade rested against Bran's chest. No guards moved. No one breathed. Outside, Drogon roared again. Bran's voice remained calm. If you kill me, the realm will never accept you. Jon's grip tightened. They already don't. For a heartbeat, the world held still. Then, the doors behind Jon slammed open. A voice rang through the hall. Stop. Jon turned. Sansa Stark stood at the entrance, flanked by northern guards. Her crown gleamed under torchlight. Her face was pale but determined. If you strike him, she said firmly, you lose the north. The throne room froze between fire and blood, brother against brother, sister between them. And Jon realized the final choice was not about the throne. It was about what he was willing to destroy to sit on it. The throne room felt smaller with Sansa standing there, not because she was loud, but because her presence carried weight. Jon did not lower Longclaw, but he did not strike either. You shouldn't be here, he said quietly, and let you become the very thing you hated? Sansa replied, walking forward slowly. No. The northern guards behind her stayed near the doors. They weren't raising weapons, they were watching, choosing. Bran remained still beneath the blade resting against his chest. You said you wouldn't fight the north, Sansa continued. You promised. I kept that promise, Jon answered. I didn't attack you. You marched through the 7 kingdoms with fire at your back, she shot back. You executed Edmure. You burned armies. I burned soldiers who stood in my way. And what happens when the next lord refuses you? She demanded. Or the next city? Jon's jaw tightened. Fear keeps order, he said. Sansa's expression shifted. Pain, not anger. That's what Cersei believed. The name struck something sharp inside him. I am not her. No, Sansa said softly. You're worse. The words cut deeper than any sword. You were good, she continued, even when it cost you everything. People followed you because they trusted you, not because they were afraid. Jon's hand trembled slightly on Longclaw. That trust put me in chains, he said. No, Sansa replied. Your silence did. The hall went quiet. You let them decide your fate, she said. You didn't fight it. You didn't argue. You walked away. I was trying to stop more bloodshed. And now? She asked gently. Jon looked around the throne room, at the guards who no longer looked certain, at Tyrion, pale and shaking, at Bran, calm but vulnerable. Outside, the distant crackle of fire echoed through the city. I am finishing what they started, Jon said, but the strength in his voice was thinning. Sansa stepped closer, only a few feet from him now. If you kill him, she said, glancing at Bran, you don't become king. Jon frowned. You become a conqueror who murdered his own brother. He sacrificed me. Yes, Sansa said. He did. That admission surprised him. He chose the realm over you. And maybe he was wrong, but killing him doesn't fix that. It proves him right. Jon's breathing grew heavier. You think I can just forgive this? He asked. No, she said firmly. But you can choose to be better than it. Bran finally spoke again. If he spares me, Bran said quietly, I will step down. The words stunned the room. Tyrion looked at him in shock. Your Grace, the realm is divided, Bran continued. It will not heal under a king half the people fear and half the people resent. Jon slowly turned his head toward him. You would give it up? Jon asked. Yes. Why? Bran's pale eyes held something new. Because this path leads to darkness I have already seen. Silence stretched between them. If you take the throne by killing me, Bran said, your reign will begin in blood that cannot be washed away. Jon's grip on Longclaw tightened again. And if I spare you, then you prove you're stronger than your anger. The words echoed inside him. Stronger than your anger. For weeks, anger had driven him, carried him, hardened him. It had made him powerful, but it had also turned him into someone he barely recognized. He looked at Sansa again. She wasn't afraid of him. She was afraid for him. Outside, Drogon roared once more, impatient, powerful, unstoppable. Jon closed his eyes for a brief second. He remembered Ned Stark's voice, honor. He remembered Ygritte's laughter, freedom. He remembered Daenerys' last breath, choice. Slowly, very slowly, Jon lowered Longclaw. The sound of steel leaving Bran's chest felt louder than any battle. Gasps filled the throne room. Sansa let out a breath she had been holding. Jon stepped back. I don't forgive you, he told Bran. I know, Bran replied, but I won't become what you expected. Bran gave the smallest nod. Then you have already won. Jon turned away from the throne. The wooden seat suddenly looked small, pointless. He walked toward the doors. Tyrion called out, if not you, then who rules? Jon stopped but did not turn. Let the lords choose, he said. Not because of blood, not because of destiny. He glanced back once at Bran, because they want to. Weeks later, a great council gathered in King's Landing. This time, there was no exile forced in secret, no quiet decisions made behind closed doors. The lords argued, debated, threatened. In the end, they chose a new system, a king or queen elected by the great houses, serving limited years before another vote. The first elected rulers surprised many. Sansa Stark, Queen of the Seven Kingdoms, not because of conquest, but because she had held the realm together when it nearly tore itself apart. Bran stepped aside peacefully. Tyrion remained his hand, older and humbler, and Jon, on the morning Sansa was crowned, Drogon circled the skies once, then flew east. Jon stood at the harbor, watching the dragon disappear beyond the horizon. Going north again? Sansa asked, joining him. Yes. For exile? Jon shook his head. For peace. He looked at her. Not because they sent me. Because I choose it. Sansa smiled faintly. You always did belong where the world is quiet. Jon smirked slightly. Maybe, as he rode north once more, it was not as a prisoner, not as a king, not as a conqueror, but as a man who had faced his own darkness and stepped back from it. The White Wolf still carried fire inside him, but this time he controlled it, and in the Seven Kingdoms that made all the difference.